this is a very rare occasion because you are going to see Senator Gillibrand being quiet and not being active all the time, right? When we first met, when she first entered the Senate, first of all, I knew she was incredibly smart because I could understand every word she said. She did not obfuscate. She did not have staff with her. She had a notebook in which she wrote down things, all of which happened, right? Mm-hmm. Then one day I called her about some urgent legislation, and she was in her kitchen with a child in one arm and a phone in the other. And she took care of everything, the phone, the child, and the legislation. Now, I thought she had invented this, but I discovered in the course of reading this wonderful book, which is, unlike most political books, not inside baseball about Washington. This is not a book telling you how much the politician knows. This is a book telling you how much you know and how much influence you could have. And it is truly for everybody. So I asked her if it was okay if we started out by her reading an initial anecdote, just so you can get the flavor of the book and understand how important it is and how welcoming it is. So, Kirsten.
If I had a daughter, I would tell her certain things. I would tell her that it's great to be smart, really smart, that being smart makes you strong. I would tell her that emotions are powerful, so don't be afraid to show them. I would tell her that some people may judge you on how you look or what you wear. That's just how it is. But you should keep your focus on what you say and do. I would tell her that she may see the world differently from boys, and that difference is essential and good. These are not the lessons I feel I need to give my sons. They already believe that they are innately strong and powerful, and that others will respect their worldview. This hit me when my younger boy, Henry, was 2.5 years old, and my husband, Jonathan, took him and Theo, his older brother, then age 7, to Theodore Roosevelt Island to explore. Along one of the paths, the kids came to a hill. Jonathan, sensing a slowdown and not wanting to carry Henry, said enthusiastically, "Come on, boys." Henry didn't miss a beat. He just nodded his little chin in agreement and said, "We can do it because we're men." Now, I love my sons, and I love Henry's confidence. I want him to think that the world is his. But how the hell did he come to believe at the tender age of 2 that he could do anything because he is a very little man? I did not teach him this. In our family, capability has nothing to do with gender. I'm one of only 20 female senators, so I have about as atypical a job as you can find for women in the United States. More to the point, how many girls in his preschool class, when faced with some hill to climb, would say brightly, "We can do it because we're women"? I can tell you how many. 0. That's why I'm writing this book. I want women and girls to believe in themselves just as much as men and boys do. I want them to trust their own power and values and say, "We can do it because we're women," not just for their own sense of self, but for all of us. Girls' voices matter. Women's voices matter.
And the book is utterly like that. It's talking to a smart friend who knows you and who can help you. And all of us, including the 2 of us and everybody here, we're all communal people, so we're all the result of all the people around us, right? And in some sense, we're kind of all like Russian dolls, you know, with the littlest person inside and then like that. So one of the things I fell in love with was Kirsten's family. And I wonder if you could, I mean, I know each one deserves a novel, let's face it, but if you if you could tell us about the two women in her household, the two Pollys, the grandmother and the mother, so we know where you came from.
Well, my mother and my grandmother were two of my greatest role models. My mother was someone who created her own path. She was a trailblazer in her own right, and she was one of only 3 women in her law school class. She always did things differently. I remember her being a very hands-on parent. She made us all the most beautiful clothes we owned when we were little. But she would typically be in our kitchen with the phone on her ear, and this is back when phones had cords, and our cord was very long. And she would stretch it till its limit, and she'd be making dinner, talking about an adoption case on the phone, saying, "Hi, honey, how was your day?" at the same time. And I just watched her seamlessly be a mom and be great at her job at the same time. She also did things differently in terms of making time for herself, which was a lesson that took me much longer to learn. She loved karate, so by the time she was my age, she had a 2nd-degree black belt, and that was unusual for upstate New York. My grandmother taught me basically how important women's voices are. She was a young woman who never went to college. She was a secretary in our state legislature in Albany, and she recognized, obviously, that women had very little role in politics back then. And instead of just accepting it, she wanted to change it. And she thought that if I could involve other women and amplify our voices together, we could have an impact. So she created a Democratic club. She asked these women to get involved in campaigns. They did all the work, all the door-to-door envelope stuffing, phone banking. And I just remember sitting at her knee and watching her do this. And I remember going into these campaign headquarters and all these ladies in August in their shift dresses, and they're stuffing envelopes, and their elbows are jiggling like this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to be one of them. But it was this world of women who felt so empowered that they could make a difference, and so I really learned from her that women's voices do matter, and that grassroots activism matters, and that what you do with your time matters. So I shared those stories, like all the stories in the book, to assure the reader that we have role models everywhere in our lives, and you can learn the simplest lesson that being yourself is important, and that's the lesson my mother taught me. I also made sure a lot of these stories had a little bit of how-to in it, because when I read books, I'm always looking for, well, how did she do it? How did she get from A to B? What made her make that decision? How did that feel? And so I included all that so that any reader could say, oh, I see why that matters. I see why that helped. And so they can see themselves in these stories.
And there's a story here about you as a child when other people are saying they want to be flight attendants and they want to be actresses and stuff like that, that you actually as a child said you wanted to be a senator, which is incredible.
Well, the funny thing is I didn't know what a senator was. I had no idea. I knew there was a family friend who was a senator and he was very important, and I thought it sounded like I could make a difference. It sounded like I could do something big. But as you know, and I share in the book, I lost that childhood bravado along the way. I became afraid to admit that I wanted to run for office or have a public service life. And that's one of the challenges our girls often have at different points in their lives when they lose that confidence. But Gloria, I don't think you've ever lost your confidence.
No, are you kidding? I wanted to be a Rockette.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. No, but I think that what's so interesting about what Kirsten writes here, first of all, you have to read about the two Pollys. I mean, they're fantastic. One was wearing roller skates in order to further her political work in Albany and the halls. I mean, one was, as you say, a karate champion, and this is a Catholic family that took in pregnant, unwed mothers. As you were saying, there was always somebody
on my mother's couch, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not great. I mean, this is like what is the best in the country. But I also think that it reflects what, in an overall sense, happens to so many of us, because as you point out, once the sort of 11, 12, 13-year-old era arrives and the gender roles come down upon you like the iron whatever, the Iron Maiden in our case, we lose our confidence. And Carol Gilligan has written brilliantly.
I was one of her study objects.
Really?
Yes,
I
she
didn't know
came
that.
to my girls' school, and I interviewed with her when I was like 10, 12, something like that.
Well, it's as a result of your interviews and all of that, it is a kind of universal that when gender comes down upon us, males or females, it comes as a restriction. Boys learn that they're not supposed to cry, that they're not supposed to be close to their mothers, that they're not supposed to be violinists or whatever it is they want to do. And girls are suddenly saying, how clever of you to know what time it is, even though... Even though they've been climbing trees and saying, I know what I want, I know what I think, right up to then. I mean, the power of gender, which is, of course, utterly invented. I mean, many cultures, including Native American cultures, didn't even have he and she in their language. It is enormously, enormously powerful. So can you talk about the ways in which you came out of that ultimately, which I think had to do with Hillary Clinton?
Very much. So I talk a little bit about the importance of role models and mentors and owning your own ambition, and that ambition is not a dirty word. But for what happened to me was I was a young lawyer in New York City at a big firm, and I noticed that Hillary Clinton, our then First Lady, went to China. And the reason why I noticed is because I had been an Asian studies major at Dartmouth. I had learned Mandarin. I studied in the dorms in Beijing. And our First Lady was on a stage saying women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And I'm thinking, why aren't I at this conference? I didn't even know about it and I wasn't invited. And why not? And the answer was I wasn't involved in politics. And so I recognized I had to get involved. And so I joined a local women's group, the Women's Leadership Forum, because someone's mom told me to do it. And the biggest and hardest part of that was I had to write a check, and it was a $1,000 check, and that was a lot of money for me back then. But it was the only advice I'd been given. So I took the advice, and I had enough money because I was a young lawyer, so I did it. And the first event I went to, Hillary Clinton was actually our speaker. And it was at the River Club, not that far from here. And I'm in the back of a big ballroom, and all these ladies, not a ballroom, a big living room. And I'm in the back, and all these ladies are much senior to me, 10, 20, 30 years older. And I don't know anybody, but she says this thing that totally wakes me up, and she looks in the audience and she says, decisions are being made every day in Washington, and if you are not part of those decisions and you don't like what they decide, you have no one to blame but yourself. And I'm thinking, oh my God, she's talking to me. And she's saying I have to run for office. And I'm really nervous. And so I'm very anxious at that moment, and I start sweating and thinking like this is about me. And so I have to recognize that there's something in me that wants to do this, and that I was afraid to embrace it, and I was afraid to say, I want to be in public service. And so that's what got me volunteering on campaigns. And for the next 10 years, I worked really hard to elect different people running for a statewide, for a local office, all across New York. And the more I got involved, the more I wanted to. And I shared the story because it wasn't clear how to get from A to B. I did not know how to get a job in public service. I first did what a lot of lawyers do, which is apply to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I didn't get the job. I then applied to 3 of the major charities, Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, Ford Foundation. I don't even get interviews. And then Hillary decides to run for Senate. I said, oh, my big chance. So I, of course, go to the headquarters volunteer, say I want to work full time, and I had no relevant experience. So I couldn't get that job. And so I went to another event, and Andrew Cuomo was the speaker, and he was then Secretary of HUD. And he was talking about public service, and I walk up to him afterwards feeling very frustrated and saying, well, you know, Mr. Secretary, I would love to do public service, but it's an insider's game, and I don't know how to get from A to B. Now, you all know Andrew. He's very provocative. So he says, what do you do? I said, I'm a 7th-year associate at Davis Polk. And he said, well, would you move to Washington? And as any single New York City person knows, you would never move to Washington. So I said, of course, I'd move to Washington. And sure enough, I get interviewed, I get a job, and I go home that night, and I share in the book how it's really important to have someone in your life that really knows you and that values you. And my husband, then boyfriend, has always been that person. And Jonathan just says to me, Kirsten, since I've known you, all you've wanted to do is public service. Davis Polk doesn't need you, and I will see you on weekends. Davis Polk alumni there. I'll see you on weekends, and sure enough, I take the job and move down 2 weeks later, and that's what started my real track towards public service. And 5 years later, 10 years, no, 5, maybe 6 years later, I ran for office. So, Having that role model, having that vision, having that acceptance of who you are and what you really want in life is a struggle for a lot of people and a lot of young women. And I think it's an important moment for all of us to say who you want to be at some point in time and not being afraid.
No, it is so important, and I hope that stories like this give us faith not only in the importance of public images. I mean, you know, Oprah, a little teenage girl in the South, saw Barbara Walters on television. Who would have thought that? And she said, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because she saw somebody doing it.
Did you have role models in sort of your whole life in terms of activism and being heard? Or did you have to find your own way?
The reason those of us who are really 50s people have such a problem is because we didn't have role models. We had Doris Day,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had Louisa May Alcott, you know, who's great, incidentally. She's great. And she was my friend. I fantasized that she would come back to life, and I was debating, you know, what I would show her and whatever. No, the only really good luck I had was that I didn't go to school very much till I was about 10 or 11. And so I missed a certain brainwashing.
That's pretty important. But I also love Gloria's story, how after she did graduate from college, you went to India for 2 years and really learned a lot about yourself and how the world works.
No, well, I did go to India. I mean, first of all, I was engaged in trying not to get married. And this is a wonderful, kind man who we stayed friends for life and all of that. And, you know, and I have to say, the handsomest person I've ever seen in my life. So I thought I have to go very far away, okay? So... But it just shows you that if you follow that kind of voice that's in you, you don't know why, that it does give you guidance. And even though I hadn't a clue what I was doing in India, just wandering around, I mean, we're talking about the end of the 50s, right?
Yeah.
But I realize only in retrospect that because I was there and walking through the villages with Gandhian Groups, Vinoba Bhave, if you know who that is, who was trying to get people to donate their land to the poor and so on. And there was a big caste riot, huge, dangerous caste riot. And the ashram was fresh out of women, so they said, would I come with their group walking? And I said, but don't you think it's a little weird, you know, that I'm...
Yeah.
And they said, no, you're no more weird than you would be from New Delhi, you know, if you're in the middle of it. Okay, so I went with a cup of Coleman and sorry, but the point is that what I learned, I didn't know I was learning, but I did, and it's helped me ever since. And that is that it was how to organize. And they used to just say to us, okay, if you want to know or want to change how people live, you have to go where they live. If you want people to listen to you, first you have to listen to them. You know, it was all about, as exactly you know, politics starts from the bottom up. Trees grow from the bottom up, not from the top down. And I never did forget that. And it was truly, truly very helpful, even though I didn't know what I was learning at the time.
For sure.
But I think it's interesting that both of us, I mean, everybody here, all of us, we're each utterly unique. You know, we are the combination of millennia upon millennia of environment and heredity. I never understood the nature versus nurture argument. It's obviously both, but anyway, we're a combination that's unique. It could never have happened before and could never happen again. And at the same time, we're communal creatures.
Very much so.
So if we can't see it, we can't be it. If we don't have the kind of encouragement that you had from the two Pollys, and still had to have a realization on the road to Damascus, it sounds like almost, when you heard Hillary.
Yeah.
You had become a corporate lawyer, which wasn't
following my heart on any level. I mean, I only became a lawyer early on because I loved the way my mother could be an advocate. I loved how self-assured she was and powerful, and she could help someone adopt a baby or navigate the buying of their first home. She was a family lawyer, and I loved that self-assurance that she had. And she was a great role model for all my girlfriends because 5 out of 6 of my best girlfriends became lawyers. She was one of the few professional women in our community, but that mattered. And I think for all young women, not only is having mentors and role models important, but for all of us, it's important to mentor someone else because there's someone who is on the ladder where you've already accomplished. There's someone who's just a further down that ladder who needs your help, your little bit of advice. And I share stories about how even the smallest mentoring moments help people's trajectory. I had this one young woman named Rain Henderson, who was my first policy person when I was campaigning in 2006, she desperately wanted to work for the Clinton Global Initiative, and there was a job opening where she could apply for this #2 spot in childhood obesity. And I said, well, who are you going to be working for? And she said, oh, I don't know, that job's open too. And I said, well, why aren't you applying for the top job? And she said, oh, I'm not qualified. I don't know that I could do that. I was like, of course you could do that. I said, and Rain, if you don't apply for it, someone else will. They'll be your boss. They won't be as smart as you. It will likely be a guy, and you'll be kicking yourself. And she said, oh, okay. I was like, just promise me you'll apply for the top job. If you don't get it, you can apply for the #2 job. Sure enough, she applies for it, she gets it. She's now running a whole division at CGI and doing amazing things. But that took 5 minutes of my time. But it was just the nudge she needed at that moment to have self-confidence. And that's something we can all do for each other. There's always some bit of advice you have that you can impart to someone else. I also spent a whole chapter on the importance of friends. And you know, I see friendships, and particularly female friendships, as the third leg of a stool. Your family's one leg and your job's the other, and the one that actually keeps the stool standing are your friends, because they're the places you can go to complain about that job or that husband or that challenge at home or whatever it is. And it is so meaningful to us, I think, as women, because we are so communal. And I think to have someone know you and support you and encourage you in the way that you need is invaluable, and something that we often, particularly mothers, young mothers who are juggling, we forget. We forget to look after ourselves. We forget to put in place what's necessary to keep us thriving. And our friends are such an important part of that.
And remembering that everything we do matters, you know, or at least we should behave as if everything we do matters, because we don't know which thing that we do matters. Right. And it's what we do as well as conscious encouragement. I mean, you know, every time a woman passes a mirror and criticizes her body, a girl is watching.
That's
right?
true.
And you know, it's the moment at which you see something, and in all kinds of ways. For instance, now, as you may notice, there I think are 3 big television shows with medical examiners who are women, played by women actors, and the number of women applying to be medical examiners has gone up like 400%, because now people know they can be medical examiners. It is just so crucial, and I do think that that's the key, you know, behaving as if everything you do matters. And that is I think, the great gift of your story, because instead of trying to tell a story to keep people out of it, look how expert I am, you know, nobody else could do what I'm doing. You're telling a story to bring people into it.
Yes, and the whole point of the book is really how important women's voices are, that we're not actually being heard in all these places where decisions are being made, but when we are heard, outcomes are better. Corporate America has already made the case. When women are on corporate boards, they have higher returns on investment, higher returns on equity. When even one woman is on a corporate board, that company is 40% less likely to have to restate their earnings. So we make a difference. It's a valuable difference. And in politics, I see it every day. I tell this one story about when I was first elected in 2006. Speaker Pelosi put 5 freshman congresswomen on the Armed Services Committee. And in that one fell swoop, it changed the conversation. We were having hearings on military readiness. And I remember Gabby Giffords, who sat right next to me, saying, the doctor at the base in my district told me that 70% of the men and women going back into combat are not mentally ready. And I amplified that narrative by saying, why is the divorce rate, the domestic violence rate, and the suicide rate higher than it's ever been in the history of America for men and women in the military? And it went to the same issue about, you know, what are we doing to keep our armed forces strong? The men on the committee focused their entire line of questioning on how many ships, how many aircraft, how many guns, all about equipment, which of course is equally as important. But it was the combination of the male and female perspectives to talk about not just equipment, but also personnel that was a far stronger and complete picture of what is military readiness. So the whole notion of this book is that women's voices matter, that their life experiences are different. They will see different problems, different challenges, but also different solutions. And when we can bring those conversations to the table, whether it's the PTA meeting or the local town council or Congress, it's going to change outcomes.
I agree. I mean, this is not about biology, obviously, because one day when men are raising children as much as women do, and women are as authoritative in the outside world as men are, this will change. I mean, it's really about culture. But this is a long battle, because I remember that Patricia Schroeder, the congresswoman from Colorado, was the first member of the Armed Services Committee. And she and Ron Dellums, the only African American and the first African American member, were given a half a vote each. And Pat went to the press and said, you know, we have, and suddenly the change, right? But also, I think, you know, in a way, she is your predecessor on the Armed Services Committee, where she got a group of nuns to do the research for her. Did you know that?
No.
Yes, right.
Well done.
But
those nuns are spending too much time on poverty. I don't know why they're not spending more time on making sure gays don't get to live together.
Yes, right. Right, and this Pope, who may be good at PR, but is still investigating the nuns.
Those nuns.
Is very upset about that. But actually, it's the same group that persecuted witches. It's actually the same. It's so you can't make this stuff up. It's the same. But also Patricia Schroeder was, you know, part of the same process in another way, because she was, I believe, the first woman to be pregnant on the floor of the House. And I remember her getting up and giving a speech saying, I have a brain and a womb. I'm planning to use both. Okay. And I think you were the sixth.
I was the sixth, yeah.
To be pregnant.
Yeah, I had my own stories, yeah.
Well, tell.
No. So bad, yeah. It was embarrassing because there was an enormous attention to my physical presence that was unnerving. But people trying to be nice, saying, when I'm 8 months pregnant, you know, Kirsten, you're even pretty when you're fat.
You can say you're even handsome when you're dumb.
If only. Yes. If I only had Gloria's wit.
You wouldn't get elected. But I think, you know, clearly it's mutual, it's communal, it's about each other's support, it's about a continuum, it's all those things. And if I were to say where we are in this continuum, I would say we've come a really long distance, and we now know that we're not crazy, the system is crazy. This is big, huge, because otherwise we felt crazy, okay? But we still are in a silo. You know, people still think there's the women's movement, there's the gay, lesbian, transgender, but there's the environmental movement that we don't understand.
It's all of it.
It's all of it.
Yeah,
it's all of it.
All of it's relevant to us, that's for sure.
And, you know, you've been dealing with part of the violence against women, that sexual assault in the military, for instance. Thank you so much for leading that effort. And you know, I think and now of course the NFL is teaching us the problems of the jockocracy, as Flo Kennedy used to call it. So with domestic violence in public.
It's really part of this institutional bias. I mean, our biggest challenge, and this is sort of the structural challenges you were talking about, is whether it's the NFL, whether it's Department of Defense, whether it's modern day universities, there's this institutional bias that protects the favored. So whether it's the star athlete, or whether it's the star student, or whether it's the star soldier, they are protected at all costs. And so the decision makers about what we do about violence against women, sexual assault, are biased, and they have a bias in favor of maintaining the status quo. And that is what's so corrosive. So when we're seeing the NFL and seeing the commissioner give a slap on the wrist to a man who not only admits to beating his wife, but we have video of him dragging her out of the elevator in the most disrespectful way, there's no facts left to be determined, but still a slap on the wrist is given. We can see that this institution is failing, and we have to have a national narrative about it. When we have the context of military sexual assault, where last year there's 26,000 cases, but only 3,000 reported, where 1 in 10 are coming forward, but most of them are retaliated against for coming forward, you know that the institution is failing. And on college campuses, we have Emma, who's carrying a mattress across Columbia today so that people can understand, the weight of the burden she carries because her rapist is still on campus. These young women, and the whole point of the book is that these young women are starting a movement, a national conversation, because they're courageous, because horrible things happen to them, but instead of just moving on, they say, no, I'm not going to. I'm actually going to speak truth to power. I'm going to demand change, and I'm going to go to campus to campus to campus to inspire other men and women to speak out. And so their voices are inspiring. Their courage is something we can all look to show that sometimes you may be the person that can carry a message, and you may never have wanted to be that person, but we have to recognize that our voices matter, that our life experience matters, that our worldview is different, and that difference is important and good. And when it's absent, our country's actually worse off for it. We have so much to offer, and the more we speak up, the better off we'll be.
And you just made connections, which actually the media has not been making, about between and among sexual assault on campus, sexual assault in the military. And I think that's a symbol of our lack, or of where we are. You know, we're not making connections. And it's absolutely crucial because, first of all, the whole idea of gender, I mean, men didn't make this up, they got born into it, and the whole idea that you have to be in control in order to be masculine, and some men get hooked on it. So, but I think still we haven't seen that it's through composed. And now we have studies, and there's a book you may know called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson, wonderful book, which shows that in every modern country in the world of all different kinds, the biggest indicator of whether there is violence inside the country, in the streets and so on, or whether that country will use military violence against another country, is actually not poverty, not access to natural resources, not religion, and not even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. Not because female life is more important than male life, it is not, but because that's what's experienced first. In the household where masculine, feminine is dominant, passive, and that normalizes everything else and maybe also includes violence, and then it normalizes race and gender and caste and all of these other, and that is a connection that would transform foreign policy.
Without a doubt. And if you think about it, it goes to this notion of, do we value women? And we can tell you, in America today, women are not valued. They're actually paid 78 cents on the dollar. And if you are an African-American woman, you are paid 68 cents on the dollar. And if you're a Latina, it's 58 cents on the dollar. So you can see this lack of valuation, this undermining of women throughout society, whether it's letting sexual violence go unprosecuted, whether it's not being tough on somebody who's perpetrating assault on his wife, whether it's in the workplace where the face of the workplace has completely changed, but the workplace rules are really stuck in the Mad Men era. We are stuck in a time and a place where there's an assumption that dads go to work and moms stay at home. Well, that is not the reality today. 8 out of 10 moms in families are working, and 4 out of 10 are single moms or primary or sole breadwinners. And so not having the support women need to reach their full potential in the workplace undermines them, and it's actually a drag on the economy. So, for example, if you had simple infrastructure like paid leave, where whatever that family emergency is, a man or a woman can take time to meet that need, and that is valued. So whether it's the new baby, whether it's the sick child, whether it's the dying, aging parent, those emergencies, those family necessities, by and large, are always dealt with, not always, are often dealt with by women in the family, and it means they have to quit their job and start back over again in their low-wage job, which is, we call the sticky floor, or they ramp off their career. Once you ramp off, it is very hard to ramp back on where you left. You will be paid less, you'll have less opportunity, less seniority, or whether it's changing jobs, again, where you lose promotion opportunities and your ability to earn your full potential. And so it's this chronic undervaluing. Something as simple as universal pre-K or affordable daycare would help all working parents, particularly when children are young, but we haven't built that infrastructure because we're not valuing the work that women do. So whether they're doing it in the home or outside the home, it's that lack of value, and that undermines the strength of our communities.
And it affects everything. I mean, in all the time that we read about economic stimulus, for instance, during the financial crisis, it had to do with banks and mortgages and all of that. Never once did I see, unless somebody, maybe I hope somebody here saw, anybody say that equal pay would be the single most effective economic stimulus this country could possibly have.
Right.
And it's not only an economic stimulus because you're going to get $200 billion more in the economy every year, and these women are going to spend it. They are not going to put it in a Swiss bank account. No.
More sneakers, more nutritious food.
But also, it's going to relieve the tax burden because the female-headed household is the poorest household, and if that woman is earning more, you know, then she's less likely to be dependent on. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. Not once did I see this mentioned, not once. So we are still paying a penalty for thinking that women over here and the environment is, no, it's all part of one movement, of one's consciousness, and we are not seeing solutions because they're associated with females, and therefore, you know, it can't be that interesting, you know, right. So, you know, if you and I and everybody here tries to make these obvious connections, I think we will be much better off. And because we have Kirsten in Washington making the connections legislatively, they will become permanent connections. For instance, we were talking about something that the women's movement has been talking about for a long time, which is attributing an economic value to caregiving. Okay, caregiving, whether it's done by men or women, is a third of the work in the country, a third of the productive work. It has no value. And so our economic planning is bananas too, because we're not allowing for that.
Yeah, and we undervalue those who do that kind of work. I mean, home health aides weren't even paid the minimum wage. So we're trying to change that, because when you are a home health worker, that is the difference between when your aging parent wants to age in place and stay at home than being institutionalized. And there's a huge difference. And anyone who has an aging parent who has health issues, you know how much they thrive when they're still in their community, still at home. And so if we can't create the infrastructure for them to actually stay where they are, we're failing them on some level. But we're not valuing care at home. We're not valuing typical roles that women always played.
Yes, and the household workers and iGenPoo and all these great organizers are out there, you know, trying to change this, you know, state by state. But it just, because some people are invisible, everyone suffers. So we think that we need high-tech workers, right? Actually, we need home care workers more.
Much more, especially as the baby boom generation ages. Alzheimer's is going to be very prevalent in larger numbers, and we don't have the support we need to actually care for our loved ones. It's a huge issue.
Yeah, right, and it's kind of, I mean, those two things, I don't know, I haven't seen them even compared.
Nope.
And it's so clear that everybody is suffering because of that.
Well, it's again, these are the kind of issues that a lot of women will talk about at the kitchen table, that will talk about as challenges for their families. And the thing that's so important to me is that if women were heard, whether it's in Congress or even just through voting or holding these elected leaders accountable, we'd have a very different national agenda. And you know, if you watch the Congress the last two sessions, they have spent an inordinate amount of time debating whether women should have access to affordable contraception. 98% of America's women take contraception. If Congress was 51% women, I guarantee you it would not be on the national agenda. It would be a foregone conclusion. So it's just an example about why women's voices are so vital. And if we can be more active in politics and public life and advocacy, I think we can change the agenda, and we could talk about much more of these structural challenges that we desperately need to address.
And there are ways, I mean, we're lucky to have you as a senator, because there are ways to address this that go from the kitchen table to legislation.
Correct.
I mean, for instance, you could attribute a value to caregiving, whether for elderly parents or children or whatever it is, at replacement level, which is a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, and make that tax deductible if you pay taxes. And if you're too poor to pay taxes, then that becomes tax refundable. And that would make a third of the productive work in the country visible. So,
And I have a bill to do both those things. Because Gloria is very smart.
so I just want to say that the roots of the tree are us. The tree growing there in Washington is Kirsten and many other good people in Washington. And we have to see those connections too.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're at home complaining.
And Gloria, that's one of the points, it's true. And throwing things at the TV, which is one of the things I did before I ran for office. I was very upset about George Bush's axis of evil. So, I was. So, one of the things I really want to talk about is this notion that all of our voices are very important and that our worldview is very important, because without them, these issues are never going to come to the fore. And women do, we fundamentally understand this, and we fight for things like breaking the glass ceiling and getting the women on the corporate boards and getting women to be more than 3% of the CEOs. But we also have to concern ourselves with this notion of low-wage workers, it's called the sticky floor, and I'll explain it. When I talk about, we always say, well, how do you do it, Kirsten? You have such a big job, you have little kids, how do you do it? My life is a billion times easier than the lady who's going to clean this auditorium tonight. And the point is that she's given her hours. She may not have sick days. She may not have vacation days. For any minimum wage or low wage worker, they have no flexibility. When I have a sick child, I can pick him up from school and bring him to work with me. If I have to cancel a meeting at the last minute because of a rush to the emergency room, that can happen. But for most of the workers, and 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women, they have none. And so if we don't have something as simple as affordable daycare, that whole first 5 years of their child's life, they are constantly trying to get to work and deal with a sick child and getting fired because they missed that day. And that's what we also have to concern ourselves with, and we can do that together.
And also, it's for the good of kids. I mean, otherwise, kids have a view of knees all day, and the television. I mean, they like to see each other. Hello, you can go, right. So everyone benefits. Now, we have lots of
Questions.
cards here. Right.
Fill them out.
Right. One wants to know, will you run for governor? No, but wait a minute. We need her in Washington, I would say.
She's taking that question away.
Okay.
I'm very grateful I am where I am.
One wants to know, which woman living would you most like to have lunch with?
Gloria Steinem.
Kirsten.
Fact.
And we just did.
That was the highlight of my day. Highlight of the year.
Me too. We're both actually here because we never get to see each other.
Yes.
Right. Let's see. Women should know not to encourage women to become insolvent. Wait a minute. And more interested. No, I don't know. This one, Cynthia, I'll look at it later, but I'm not quite sure I get it. Okay. Since graduating from college less than 10 years ago, I've been shocked to find myself constantly dealing with discrimination from my female supervisors, constant bullying, threats, and leniency toward my male counterparts. As a young woman in the workforce, I am looking for mentors, but have had to rely on advice from my parents because my supervisors don't provide this guidance. What advice?
Who was the person who said there's a very cold place in hell for women who don't help other women? Who said that? I don't know who said it, but yes. So there are challenges, whether it's a male or female boss. But in terms of my own story, there are challenges wherever you are, but you have to find your mentors and role models where you can. And navigating any workplace is difficult, but some of the reasons why I shared some of my own personal stories about challenges I had was so that when you read these stories, you can feel that you're not alone. These are challenges that happen to everyone. And one story I included was when I was a young lawyer, and I worked really hard in a case. I was working every weekend, canceled vacations, years on working hard. And in one dinner, a celebratory dinner, the partner I was working for gets up to say, well, let's congratulate some people, and I want to thank Kirsten for her hard work. And don't you just love her haircut? Doesn't she look great? I was crushed. I was so I felt so devalued at that moment. I rolled my eyes. I looked at a girlfriend in the room. We'd both been there before, and I pushed past it. I said, he's a jerk, and I know he values me, but if there had been anyone in that room that didn't know me and didn't know how hard I worked, it would have hurt my career chances. And I didn't have any tools as a young 20-something to deal with that. I had no idea what to say, how to act, and I said nothing. But the reality is these challenges happen all the time, and what we have to do is find our mentors, find our role models where we can, push through, know in your heart of hearts you are going to make partner, and someday you're going to be that guy's boss, or at least be able to set a tone and be able to help someone else. And that's what we're all responsible for.
Mm-hmm. And this questioner is addressing women who are supervisors who do this, right? So I think we need to remember that a system that wrongly says that half the human race is inferior to the other half wouldn't work unless that belief was internalized. And it's not unique to women. I mean, it's the anti-Semitic Jewish person of the past, I hope, or it's the black family that resisted going to a black physician because they didn't think that physician might, it's actually the most brutal and terrible thing, which is called by psychologists internalized oppression. Right? And we didn't put it there, but it is there. And only by pointing it out, I would hope that this woman who wrote the card would point it out to your supervisor, that she is treating people differentially, that she is treating men better than women, and what that means about her own view of herself, right? And to support her and so on. But it's not...
But unless that gets you fired, so... You have to decide for yourself.
Or it gets her fired.
Yeah. It's hard to navigate.
Now this is something that I don't know, and maybe you do. What do you think of the proposed change to the primary system? I don't know, and I don't know. Do you? And the potential impact in New York.
I'm not sure what the questioner's asking. Meaning merging, we already merge our votes. Oh no, primary. So I didn't know that was a proposal right now that you could. I'm not sure what she's talking about, but she might be talking about having anyone be able to vote in a primary. Whoever it was. There is people who would like anybody to be able to vote in a primary. Some places do that. It tends to make the primaries less powerful because moderates vote in it as not just the primary voters. So the result, I think, most people who study this would say it would make us less partisan. It would actually make us more less far apart, which is not a bad thing.
Do you think the federal government will ever consider domestic violence a civil rights issue?
It is a civil rights issue, and one of the biggest challenges we have is that it's not taken seriously as a crime. So in the college campus setting where we have gender violence, you have sexual violence, you have rape, you have oftentimes administrations who don't see it as a crime. They see it as a college prank. They see it as, oh, they were drinking too much. She said yes, he said no. And they don't see it as what often is the case, which is a recidivist perpetrator who targets the victim in advance, who plans out how he's going to commit this crime, and then executes on it. And they do it over and over and over again. And that is a huge challenge in terms of people understanding who are responsible for creating a safe college campus or making sure men and women in the military are not brutalized and get justice, is that they have to define it as the crime that it is. It doesn't help that a lot of our DA's offices and police departments around the country aren't good at this either. I think the statistic is something like 2% of rapes are actually prosecuted in the country. So that's twice as good as the 1% in the military, but it's not really where we need to be. So it's a longer term, larger scale problem that we have to address globally across the board.
And again, the connections are there. For instance, in Florida, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, if Zimmerman had been prosecuted for his actual domestic violence beforehand, Trayvon Martin might be alive, right? But the fact of the matter is that it wasn't even admissible at his trial, that there had been instances of domestic violence before. So again, it's the connections, you know, it's that we all pay a price for this. Now, this is a great one because you can tell us who to, you know, get out and campaign for, okay? Based on all the knowledge you have about the upcoming election, will the Dems hold the Senate? And I would only add, tell us who to campaign for.
Yes,
so we make sure.
Yes, yes, we are going to hold the Senate, and I will tell you why. So, holding the Senate is so important because of a whole host of reasons, which we can talk about next. But the reason why I believe we will hold the Senate is because our candidates are stronger. Now, I can't assume this whole audience is Democratic, but I'm going to assume most of the audience is. And the reason why I do that is because we're at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. But I believe we can hold the Senate because our candidates are very strong. So for example, I'm focusing on 6 women candidates very, very intently. Jean Shaheen in New Hampshire, Kay Hagan in North Carolina, and Mary Landrieu in Louisiana. All of those are tough, tough states. Jean is in a purple state, but the race is much tighter than it should be given who her opponent is. But I think she will win because she's superior, better, and we can all go to New Hampshire and actually campaign for her. It is not far away from New York City, so I expect a lot of these people to get on a bus and go. So I believe she can make a difference. I think Mary Landrieu is so well loved in New Orleans. I think she's going to break through. And Kay Hagan is doing very well. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that women are often perceived as honest brokers, as someone who can break through a partisan field and be seen as the person who represents our values. For Heidi Heitkamp to be able to win in North Dakota, it means a lot of Republicans say, I trust her more than the other guy. I think that's going to be true for Kay, so I believe she can win. There's 3 female challengers who have a great shot of winning as well. You've got Allison Grimes running against Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, which is possible. And we have Michelle Nunn running in Georgia, who is one of the smartest, most fantastic candidates I've ever met in my life. She may be the breakthrough candidate in Georgia, even though it's red, red, red. And then we have Natalie Tennant, who, while West Virginia may well be a long shot, she is the candidate who could win it. She's got a narrative that's really going to speak to people of her state. She was Secretary of State. She cracked down on fraud, both against Democrats and Republicans. She cut her budget. She comes from military family. She has a real story to tell. So I feel like those 6 women are vitally important to the U.S. Senate. I, of course, support our men, too, and I focus particularly on the 3 Marks, Mark Begich, Mark Udall, and Mark Pryor. They're all in red states, but they all have a great shot of winning because they're better candidates. So these races have to be fought tooth and nail to the very last moment. Almost all the races are literally neck and neck. They've sustained enormous amounts of negative campaign ads from undisclosed corporate money. We desperately need publicly funded elections. And if we can achieve publicly funded elections, if we can achieve that in the long term, we'll have a very different democracy. You'll have a lot more women running, I think, which would be a good thing. So I'm very optimistic, despite the hard work we have to do. We have to work very hard. Now, for a lot of New Yorkers, a lot of these candidates come in all the time, ask for support. I tend to host those events. Please come to my events. And we will make sure these candidates can be heard. Their voices is what has to come through, and that usually comes through mailers or television or radio, and that's what we're going to try to support.
No, thank you. Is that not a great set? You just figured out what we can do before Election Day. Here's one I love. First of all, I would like to thank you for co-sponsoring the Energize Africa Act. When are you planning to bring it to a vote? Ariel Gold, age 14. Thank you.
Thank you, age 14. Where are you? Show me. We hopefully will get to vote on that probably in the lame duck if we vote on anything. It depends if we keep the Senate. It's something that could come up in the next session of Congress as well. So I think it's very important, and these are the kind of things that holding the Senate really makes a difference on.
This is interesting. Do you or I belong to a Lean In circle? This is Sheryl Sandberg's book, you know, Lean In. And why or why not?
I've had circles of friends that we have been leaning in for a very long time. I think it is very important. I read another book called The Stiletto Network, and it was all about how women have been collaborating together in these small groups across the country in a very vital and very productive way. But me and my girlfriends, we talk about stuff all the time. We give each other encouragement about applying for that big job, cheering for each other when we're trying to get that big job, you know, letting each other cry on our shoulders if you don't get the big job. We do it all the time. And it's something that is so helpful. It is those relationships among women that are so intimate and so necessary to keep us balanced. And I think it's a great idea that Cheryl had. I think it is really important for women who are aspiring to move up the ladder in their careers, because sometimes we need that nudge. That conversation I had with Rain, she needed to hear from someone that you can do this. I had a similar, not similar, but interesting situation when I was in the Senate. I was watching a colleague run a very tough race. She was trying to get reelected, and she was running herself ragged. She was losing weight left and right. She went down at least 3 sizes, but she was still wearing her regular suits, and they're falling off her. So I go to Ann Taylor, and I buy her a cute pantsuit and a matching blouse, and I bring it to the cloakroom, and I say, come here. It's like a present for you for your campaign. She opens it up, and she's like, oh, thank you. I have no time for myself, blah, blah. So the day she puts the suit on is her big debate, and she texts me, and she says, I just put on the suit you gave me. It looks great, and I'm going to go out and beat this guy. Best text I ever got. And so I really feel that, again, what a lean-in circle really is, it's a group of women, and I'm sure men are invited too, that are designed to support one another in all their life decisions, to encourage people and your friends when they need it most, to tell them they can do it. In fact, when I was walking on stage, I said, Gloria, you've got to write this book so I know what to do. I need to know how to get from A to B. And she says, you already know how to get from A to B. And again, like, that is such a nice thing to say to me. So.
And it's so true, right?
It doesn't feel that way.
But both those things are important, that it's true and that it doesn't feel that way, so that we all understand that. I think that actually the 2 most helpful things about Cheryl's book are the lean-in circle, because we are communal people. Yeah. You know, we can't do it by ourselves. Mm-hmm. And especially because I work mainly in the women's movement. I mean, you know, I've had all lean-in circles all my life. We've been having dinner together for 40 years, you know, some other way. You know, that it's absolutely crucial, because
without a doubt,
we are communal people.
And interestingly, the women of the Senate act that way towards each other, whether we're Democrat or Republican. The women of the Senate, Barbara Mikulski, when the number of women was 2, started saying, we need caucus meetings. So she asked the other female senator, let's have dinner. And so these dinners have continued over the last 25 years. And so we meet as women every quarter just to talk about life. And we see each other as mothers, as daughters, as sisters, as friends, and as individuals first. And what it allows for is collaboration, because once you get to know someone and you've talked about their daughter's wedding and what you're wearing, you know, you're not going to go to battle on the Senate floor as readily. And in fact, what it allows us is we listen more. We find where the common ground is, and then we build our consensus from there. And any piece of legislation I've ever passed in Congress, it's because I've had a strong Republican woman helping me. So whether it was Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, and it's Susan Collins leading the charge, getting the 7 Republican votes we need, or whether it's passing the 9/11 health bill with Lisa Murkowski and Olympia Snowe going into their caucus meetings, talking to the Republican colleagues and saying, why aren't we standing with first responders? Those women made a difference because we knew we agreed. We knew we had a shared value. And I think it's something that, it's not unique to women, but it's something that's often present in women, this interest in finding common ground and building from there.
And the other thing that I found very helpful about her book was saying to women, if you plan to have children, the single most important career decision you will ever make is who your partner is. Now, I noticed that in your book you say you have a yin-yang marriage.
Very much so.
And what did you mean by that?
Well, I'm the charge ahead, let's do it, let's go, and whatever. And Jonathan's like, well, let's think about that. Let's think about it, let's think it through, let's figure out how we're going to do that. Jonathan is very thoughtful and much more of an introvert. I'm much more the extrovert. My sons are exactly the same way. Theo, the older son, is very lovely and patient and kind. And Henry wants to do everything now. So we very much have seen that in our children. But you know, Jonathan has always been this person who's been able to give me the right advice at the right time, and that's made such a difference in my life. He's also the person who encourages me in a way I need to be encouraged, whether it was that first moment when I was going to leave my big law firm, or whether it was when I submitted my name to be considered for the Senate. You know, Jonathan sees things so simply. I didn't know. I thought I haven't paid my dues. I'm not senior enough. I don't know if I should do this. And he just said, well, Kirsten, you know, can you help more people in the Senate? We are only in this to help people. And I said, well, yeah, in the Senate I'd represent 20 million people. In the House I represent 600,000. And any senator, no matter how junior, can start a debate, stop a debate, shape a debate. And he said, well, then you should do it, because that's the only reason why we're here. And so, again, his simplicity of looking at things differently always has benefited me. And so I feel very, very lucky. But to Cheryl's point, who you pick, it's funny, you know, we have many great partners. We have many great husbands. They do what they do as best as they can. Johnny's very good at dishes, not so much for laundry. But still, despite the love and support we do have, women are still doing 70% of childcare and housework. And so that's why some of these larger structural battles are still really important. It matters if we have affordable daycare. It matters if we have equal pay, because we don't have the structural support we actually need to do all that we are doing.
And it matters that kids grow up seeing that men can be loving and nurturing.
Yes. And
because it's a libel on men to say that that's not true. And if you don't see it, you don't know that it's possible.
Well, that's why if paid leave was gender neutral, which is the way I've written the bill and designed to do it, it makes a difference if men are taking some form of parental leave when they have a baby. It makes a difference if a husband and they have some tragedy in their family and a child is gravely ill, if he takes time to meet the needs of that. It matters for companies to see that families matter and that these roles that we play outside of work matter, as opposed to just relegating it to women's work that doesn't matter. I think it's very important that we begin to talk about these as societal issues, family issues.
I'm getting a little concerned about time, because I don't have a
3:32,
watch.
yeah,
on.
we're finished. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, there's
Right
a
there.
clock.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Why don't you do last question?
Okay. Oh, gosh, it's too hard. There are too many wonderful questions here. Okay, well, okay.
Or you can close this out.
I'm going to put two together, and we'll do them very fast, okay? Because this one is important, because it says, please comment on the impact of the trend to restrict women's reproductive rights at the state level. What can we do?
Deadly.
And I think it's so important that we focus on the states, because they, for one thing, they redistrict themselves into perpetuity otherwise, and it's the reason why the House doesn't represent the majority of Americans in public opinion polls on issues, because the state legislatures have redistricted, right?
Very much so.
Right.
The things that are going on in the states are very damaging, and they're really affecting and disenfranchising voters. A lot of this effort to make it harder for people to vote is really undermining our ability for our voices to be heard. So we have to push back on these voting rights issues. We also have to push back on how they're trying to regulate and restrict women's access to basic reproductive health care. It is absurd that these legislatures are making it impossible for women to get access to reproductive health services. And we have to fight for that on the national level to protect it, but we also have to be prepared to fight on the grassroots level. And as you said, all democracy starts from the grassroots level. Everything grows, all rights, all privileges are from the ground up. And so we as advocates, as women, as mothers, have to go into communities wherever we live and demand to be heard, because these rights and privileges are about our ability to make our own decisions about our families. They're about our ability to be heard at the ballot box and to be able to vote. And there is a very concerted effort by very conservative legislatures to unwind all of it. So we have to fight back, and it has to come from regular people. And so we can do that as advocates. We can make sure our friends and families and colleagues, wherever they live, are aware of what's actually happening, and then fighting on the federal level to guarantee basic rights and try to make sure these human rights and civil rights are actually guaranteed.
And that's the last question about the Equal Rights Amendment. So I just want to say that, yes, we still need the Equal Rights Amendment. It would be really nice to be part of the Constitution. And it is coming back. It is coming back, and it'll be a long struggle, but I think that we can do it. And the old argument against it, which was, on the one hand, that it would destroy Western civilization as we know it, integrate bathrooms, bring about marriage equality, support, all the things that have already women in combat. It's already happened, okay? So right. And the other argument was we don't need it because we already have it. Neither one of those arguments are true. I do think that we can bring it back, and especially we can because we are so lucky to have this human being here representing us.
So I just want to say the last word. I just want to thank you all for coming. But I really want to thank you, Gloria. Gloria, as you know, is iconic. She's been a role model for all of us. She's been a woman who has been through fire. And I, as a feminist, value her and the role she has played and her fearlessness and her unbelievable ability to speak truth to power for decades is something I aspire to, I am grateful for, and cannot thank you enough for being the woman that you are and have always been. Thank you, Gloria.